the Jacksonville Jaguars here. This was a team we both had high expectations for. Trevor Lawrence, one of the most beat up quarterbacks in the league, had an ankle, shoulder, and knee injury this year where he had a sprained knee. But that's not an excuse to have one of the most underperforming defenses in the league. You had a top five pass rusher in Josh Allen this year, who I believe was top three in sacks so far this season with 17 and a half. Yet your team was in the bottom of the league with pressures with a top five rusher this year. And then you have your corners who are getting cooked by Ryan Tannehill in a win or go home game. And then you have Trevor Lawrence, the prince who was promised, who is throwing two, not one, but two interceptions, giving the Titans momentum in this game. And then all you had to do was win or go home in this game. Ryan Tannehill probably isn't going to be on the Titans next year. Derrick Henry probably isn't going to be on the Titans next year. And then there are conversations about Mike Vrabel coming into this year, whether or not he's going to be with the Titans. And there's some discussions to be had there. But the Jaguars completely bottoming out, completely falling off a cliff. They lost how many games to finish the season when they were 10-3?
At one point they were 8-3, and they finished the season 9-8. So they went 1-6 to end it,
Yeah.
which is pathetic for a team that we mentioned going into the season. The reason why we were excited, you get Calvin Ridley, who's a great receiver. You have Christian Kirk there already, and their offense looked really dynamic last year. And you have Doug Peterson, Super Bowl winning head coach. So you have Trevor Lawrence also, who last year looked like a top 10 quarterback. And now this season, like, you looked at his numbers, you're like, these are fine numbers, but are these good numbers for somebody who's the prince that was promised? A guy that we were talking about 2 years before he was even drafted, a guy who was perennially in the national title game in Clemson. This is pathetic for a guy who, at this point, like, I can't call him a bust because he's still played decently, but he's definitely underwhelmed me so far in his first 3 years because the first year, you have Urban Meyer. Okay, we can erase that year. Everyone has that year. Last year, you're fine. 24 touchdowns, 8 picks. And now in this season, you regress. You have 24 touchdowns, 12 picks. And, like, there's no really good excuse for it at this point. You have a good running game. You have good receivers. And you have a good head
Yeah.
coach. And, like, I understand you have injuries, but at this point, like, is Trevor Lawrence, like, what is Trevor Lawrence at this point? Because at one point, he looks like he's a top 10 quarterback. And on the other side, it looks like he's a bottom 10 quarterback at any point.
Yeah.
Like, I don't understand. I don't know what to think of Trevor Lawrence at this point. Truly, at this point.
Yeah, and I think with Trevor, he was banged up at some point, so I'll give him somewhat of a pass this season, and I'll disagree because I feel like they have had some issues establishing a consistent run game, and it has felt like it was Travis Etienne, but most of Etienne's plays I felt like were either screens or toss plays, but they really weren't able to establish a consistent run game throughout the season. Tank Bigsby has looked like a bust so far. They weren't really using Dearness Johnson until the end of the season, but I don't think they were really able to establish a consistent run game. However, when you do have Christian Kirk there, you do have Calvin Ridley there, and you do have Evan Ingram there, that's weapons enough. And the fact that you were that bad to finish the season where all you had to do was win one of those games at the end of the year, and then in Tennessee, like, I picked the Titans to win this game just because I thought in Tennessee against Mike Vrabel that would be a tough environment, and the Jags just haven't looked that good to finish the season, but we shouldn't have gotten to this point to begin with. And then even when we watched the Jags earlier this year, we were like, I get they're winning, but it just doesn't look very good.
Mm.
It's like it seems like they have to struggle for every single yard, and then Trevor just, like, he doesn't hit that many big throws down the field. He's very accurate. He's good at layering the ball, but there are also some plays in this game. It's like you sailed it over Evan Ingram's head. Then you had Calvin Ridley wide open to potentially tie the game in this game, and I was like, no, you can't be making Jimmy Garoppolo plays in the Super Bowl where he overthrows Emmanuel Sanders. Like, no, you're Trevor Lawrence. You're the Prince who's promised. You're 6'6". You need to hit these plays down the field, and he just didn't practice at the end of the week for like 2 weeks here, and definitely some injuries and consistency was an issue. But That's also on Doug Peterson, where he wasn't able to establish a run game when he's an offensive head coach. He
Mm.
wasn't able to take pressure off of his quarterback. So some of it does fall on Trevor here, but some of it also falls on Doug Peterson here because while he did get to the Super Bowl, he has won a Super Bowl there. Jim Schwartz was the defensive coordinator. He had Frank Reich on his staff there. Nick Foles goes on this incredible run where you have Darren Sproles and Alshon Jeffrey playing out of their mind. Your defense is playing crazy, but after that, you had some questionable years with Doug Peterson. So, with a dysfunctional organization with the Jaguars, if they have the opportunity to go get Bill Belichick, I don't think Doug Peterson's job is safe if he plays like this next year because the Jaguars seem like the team, if any team was going to win their division, it was the Jaguars because we didn't know what the Texans were going to be. We didn't know what the Titans were going to be. And we didn't know what the Colts were going to be.
Mm.
But now you have Anthony Richardson coming back with the Colts. They'll be better than you next year. We have CJ Stroud getting more weapons. You have another draft and a free agency with a ton of cap space. They'll be a lot better next year. You may be the third best team in your division next year.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's a good point with Doug Peterson because after the Super Bowl, think about what he surrounded Carson Wentz with and how bad it was. He was throwing to Travis Fulgham at the end of it.
Yeah.
And that was an absolute disaster there. Takes a year off, goes to Jacksonville, and it felt like he did fix Trevor for a certain point, but like I don't like what can we really say of either of these two guys at this point? Because Doug Peterson, you take away this miraculous Super Bowl run, and what success have they actually had? He's won maybe two playoff games outside of that Super Bowl. And then in Jacksonville, he's underperformed. I mean,
Yeah.
this year we had them at 14-3. If they weren't 14-3, they should have at least been 11-6, 12-5 with the team that they had there. I know their defense I was never in love with, but like Trayvon Walker, he's been disappointing for them. And then their
Oh,
secondary has been
yeah, Trayvon Walker. Good point there. Because we were talking about that yesterday. Mr. Dinosaur Arms and Aiden Hutchinson, they're like, oh, his arms are too short. We can't take him. Let's take Trayvon Walker. Who was taken after Trayvon Walker in that draft?
We had Aiden Hutchinson,
Yep.
we had Derek Stingley, we had Sauce Gardner, we had
Reek.
Kayvon Thibodeau,
Reek Woolen.
Reek Woolen as well. Pretty much all of the edge rushers taken after Trayvon Walker were better in the top five. Keep in mind,
Yeah.
so I think it's safe to say they whiffed on that one because I would take Kayvon Thibodeau over him too.
Yeah, Trayvon Walker's definitely been disappointing. They tried to switch him to another position there, but the Jaguars, it's like you should have been the one seed this year, and you were in it against the Ravens on Sunday Night Football, and they were moving the ball down the field, and then Trevor Lawrence makes two of the dumbest plays I've ever seen where suddenly he looks like Daniel Jones out there and has no idea what he's doing. And some of those fumbles, I'm just like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, that's the thing with him. He fumbles, he throws interceptions, and he doesn't put up enough production for me to be like, wow, this is definitely a top 10 quarterback. I
Yeah,
see it when I watch the games. I see the talent there. I see why he was taken number one, but he just doesn't string it enough consistently enough. And
yeah,
at this point, like I feel like he's somewhat of a Kyler figure where, and I've definitely seen Kyler have his moments too, where he plays out of his mind one game and he has a great game, and then he just doesn't string along the consistency. For
yeah,
Trevor, he's kind of giving me that same vibe where yes, he's good and he's consistent and it's hard for me to say they should move on from him, but at the same time like at some point you got to elevate your team. And at
yeah.
this point, I know he was hurt. Maybe I should cut him slack, maybe I shouldn't. I don't know. But next year, if they have another season like this, you really got to start to consider because you have CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson in your division.
Yeah, I think next year you have to fix the defense and then you have to establish a run game. And then if Trevor Lawrence is disappointing, we move off of Doug Peterson. And then with Trevor, it's like we have to get over 30 touchdowns. It's like you cannot be in the 24 to 28 touchdown range.
Mm.
It's fine, but you're also the number one pick in that draft. That draft is not looking good right now. And then you had a chance to just walk to the number one seed. It's like it's absolutely ridiculous how you
Mhm.
guys fell apart. Versus the Texans and the Colts this year, it's like, okay, well, both of those teams are looking like they're going to be better than you next year. And then talent wise, CJ Stroud looks like he's better just as a leader. Seems like he has his guys working a lot harder there. Seems like he's putting in more work than Trevor Lawrence. And then Anthony Richardson seems like he's going to be an absolute freak of an athlete, which has more, I feel like he has the highest ceiling out of both of those quarterbacks. Maybe CJ Stroud's better at being a quarterback, but just as an all around athlete, you're looking at the return of Cam Newton.